Hi, Mitchell Levy, global credibility expert, and we are at one of the funnest times of my day. And that is talking to somebody who is super cool about who they are and their values. So, uh, Basel, want to say hi, welcome, Basel Nassar. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Mitchell. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Hey, you're welcome. It's great to have you. And so, the question I like to ask to open up is, who are you?
Complicated question. We'll see if I can do the justice in answering it for you. Well, I think professionally, identify as a serial entrepreneur. Everyone kind of, when you're younger, you try to figure out what you're going to be when you grow up. Well, I still haven't figured it out. Other than I like to build things and innovate for myself. I'm very compassionate. I think at times to a fault, I've been told. There have been many times where I've given deep considerations to people because I tend to see the best in people most of the time. And so that unfortunately has worked against me. But I would say by and large, it's worked to my advantage. I've always surrounded myself with great people. And a lot of the people that I've worked with have been with me for many years, which I think is a testament to quality of character.
Tell me about that a little bit more. So you've had people follow you from previous businesses to this one.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I know I've had some very loyal people. Our last project was a little over 20 years. One lady actually in particular was, I think 15 or 16 at the time, came in as a contractor and had the aspirations to build this demo company. And sure enough, within a couple of years, she did, and just so happens to be running my marketing department these days in her mid 30s. So, I think if you treat people right, you often hear if you treat the janitor the same way as the CEO, people tend to reciprocate. And I've felt that that's always been something that I've kept pretty close to the cuff, and the way I treat people. And I think it comes back to pay you handsomely if you do it right.
You said something that I may actually want to not necessarily disagree with, but sort of ask you about. You said people said that you're compassionate to a fault, and I think sort of compassion, showing respect, having the intent and commitment to do the other things are values of credibility. And so I'm wondering if when people say to you too compassionate, and you're feeling that energy, is that really true? Is that possible?
Well, I think, certain times where you give considerations, whether in business or maybe from a supplier that okay, I'll give you a classic example. 10, 15 years ago, we had a supplier that was producing product for us. They couldn't keep up with the demand load. I had a great relationship with the team. I felt there was a degree of loyalty in terms of them bringing us on when we really needed a support system. And then now I've scaled the business enough where they kind of needed us, right? And there were many opportunities for us to move the facility. And I was very compassionate about their situation and their inability to support us at the time. We took time and reorganized, let them grow. And they were ultimately our long-term co-man for about 15 years. And so that's one time where it worked out. But I can tell you there was a strong period of time there where we weren't getting any product. And my loyalties, may have very well gotten in the way of a proper business decision. So, again, it worked out in the end. And I think over time you learn when to exercise those discretions, one way or the other as you get a little bit more experience. So I tend to listen to that a little bit more now than I used to before.
Yeah. It's so interesting when things work out in the end, you're like, yeah, I'd made the right decision. There was probably times in there that your team was telling you to change or to not let them work. How did those conversations go?
Well, everybody, as an entrepreneur, I found that most everybody around you that's not generally invested in the outcome, I want to make sure I say this the right way, doesn't necessarily care whether or not you succeed or fail. There's a level of indifference. And that's almost as bad as, I guess, not caring. Okay. I think when you have folks like that, you're always going to be hard pressed to please. When there's individuals around you that understand the end game, everybody embraces the pivot points. And in any business, if you don't have the capacity to pivot and your team can't pivot with you, then you've got a vessel going two separate directions, and that just won't work. So I think in our, whenever we've talked in the past, I've always said that team comes prior to execution, and with the two, you can generally get things done. But our team has always been very amenable to the pivoting and the moves that we need to make to climb certain hurdles. I make mistakes. I think I've done product launches in the past where I regret wholly coming to market, but I learned very quickly that's probably a segment I shouldn't touch for a while. So there's definitely education along the way.
You were talking about your team, and the team followed you. Maybe when you talk a little bit about your team in terms of where they were in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And then I may steer. I'm going to give you like 3 questions. You can answer as many of them, and I'll stop you in the middle. Where the team was, where they are now, so why they followed you, and of course I want to ask you about the big pivot, the COVID pivot. But
sure.
Yeah. Tell me about the team of the past and why they followed you here.
Well, one particular individual was a stay-at-home homemaker when I met her the first time. This was 20 years ago. Running my accounts payable department, and then within less than 2 years running the entire office. I think it comes from really my management style. I know that there was a brief phase in my career where I was working for a couple of Fortune 500s, and when you go through an admin shift, everybody has a different way of how they want to steer the ship. And I always felt that operators that put me under constraint, and I would just kind of put my hands up like this and say, "Don't tie my hands, leave me free to operate." Well, I learned a hard lesson, over the years like that if you are capable and you have the skills and the desire to actually follow through, and you give those type of people autonomy to make those decisions and run their departments, they'll thrive. And I've done that all along the way. Everyone that is still with me today, I've used that same management style, and it's genuine. I don't, fabricate these feelings on a quarterly basis to get an outcome or an objective. I truly expect the best out of you. And I put myself under the same level of criticism, if not higher. I'm, like I said, I'm not subject to perfection, right?
And so, okay, so I assume she followed you to the current company. Talk about, so what was the company in the past? What industry were you in?
Yeah.
And then talk a little bit about your industry now, and
sure,
potentially why you felt some of your people could make that transition with you to this new industry.
Well, look, to say, I think there's a following me, and then there's a certain amount of convincing that goes on. There's a period where every entrepreneur takes some time to incubate. For me, it was about 3.5 to 4 years from the last project. And it was just putting into perspective exactly what I was willing to do. As an entrepreneur, you have to accept a certain level of trauma the first few years. And I was making sure I was prepared for that, both financially and psychologically. There's nothing easy about doing what we do. If you do it right, it's extremely painful. Okay. So there was a matter of convincing these people to come on board, because we just had a 20-year run. The first 10 years were all bootstrap, heavy lifting. The last 10 years, you really got to see the business flourish and get to scale. And so once they came back, then it was, okay, we know how to do this. We actually came from an industry that was about I want to say 50 to 100 times larger in terms of velocity. So for us, going to market, it was never really a surprise when there was a lot of activity. So the current industry, pet, it's a little bit slower moving. It takes time to get up and down the street. You're dealing a lot of independent pet stores, a lot of people that aren't in a position to make a decision very quickly. So I think that's been the biggest transition for the team. They're really accustomed to high velocity, multitask, multi-department, and we've kind of had to turn down the volume just a little bit. And I do think COVID had something to do with that, because when you apply the mechanics that we do to building brands, I'm a firm believer in if you continue to do the right thing consistently, success always comes.
What was the previous company and industry you were in?
Well, I've been in consumer products prior to pet for a little over 20 years. I was one of the original Greek yogurts in the U.S. marketplace, early 2000s. I did have a couple of other partners, and that was probably my first major experience in a global brand build where we actually took it from North America outside the country and moved into multiple international markets. We scaled that, to great heights, well beyond any of my dreams, and and had the opportunity of working for the acquiring company for about 8 years. They're about a $5 billion company. Our team was put in charge of running the refrigerated division. So for 8 years, I had all the assets that were never afforded to me prior: regulatory teams, research and development teams, innovation pipelines. And so we learned a lot about the proper way to innovate without necessarily making mistakes, because I said in an interview recently that if launches were free, they would be limitless. It costs a lot of money to introduce product to market. There are no guarantees, and you want to do it intelligently. So over that 8 years, what I really think the big takeaway for us, Mitchell, was the idea that we can infuse probiotics sustainably in pretty much any medium. And I wanted to take that knowledge and apply it to pet.
If you're a pet owner, how do I, as a pet owner, how would I be convinced that probiotics make sense for my cat or dog? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think I wasn't necessarily a believer 15, 20 years ago when probiotics were introduced to me the first time. There was a lady from Spain that I got to know quite well. She wrote a global book that focused on a yogurt type of a diet. And in that, we learned a lot about just flora, probiotic development, how it changes the balance within the gut, and how it helps items pass all the way through the colon-rectal system. And so I applied that logic, and I'll tell you, I probably at one point used to weigh close to 300 pounds, and I would say over the course of 10 years and discipline, proper eating, introducing probiotics to my diet, getting exercise, hydrating, I've been able to shed that and maintain a pretty healthy life. In fact, I'm almost 50 and I'm in better shape now than I was in my 20s. So, I'm a big believer in gut health, in what it does for you in terms of the way it makes you feel. And the pet market was really underserviced, and it's largely because it's always been a kibble and bits world. It's only been in the last 10 years that we've really seen the premiumization of the specialty channel as these raw food concepts are coming in. And while everybody's trying to romance protein, we really wanted to do something with impact value. And that's why I focused everything on probiotics and digestive health.
By the way, you look amazing.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
It's a long road.
Yeah, that's definitely not a simple going from how much you weigh to where you are now. That's not so, and to maintain it. So congratulations.
It's a life correction, right?
Do you focus on that for animals as well?
I think, yeah, we have, we call it the Boss Ranch. So we've got 4 dogs, 2 cats, and a giant tortoise. And so everybody has a specific diet. We're very focused on meal prep. So, I mean, if we're going to take the time to prepare a nice meal for ourselves, it only takes a few minutes longer to do it for your dogs and cats. So, yeah, we're very conscious of what they eat. In fact, it was my first dog that inspired me to get into pet, because he was finicky. He really wasn't holding down any of his food. And that's where I started to say, hey, protein first, probiotic loaded. Let's give it a try. And that so far we have a lot of pet parents that come to us and say, we really can't make it throughout the weekend with your food. Now, mind you, that's a rare remark we'll get from a customer, but it always really brings me great joy to hear that there are people that are reliant on what our product does for their pets.
By the way, thank you for saying that. I just wanted to point out, if you're listening or you're watching, like, you didn't do the bravado. Here's a comment from one of many of our clients. What you said was probably the truth. Here's a here's a comment that a client had a hard time going through the weekend without the product.
Sure.
I love that. I mean, and how you said it, you're not overselling. You're basically showing up, which I'm still feeling about if I was working inside your company, why I'd want to continue to work with you is simply you seem to tell it like it is.
It's full transparency. I'm very big on customers and retailers understanding the nutritional profiles. We make them available. So if you want to see how much phosphorus is in the meal, there's no mystery. Like you and I, when we walk into a grocery store, we're far more aware of what the label says than we were 15 years ago. Pet parents are the same way, if not more sensitive. They walk in, they have an aging dog, they have a puppy. They want to understand what the feeding regimen, supplement, or treat regimen should look like. And, you need guidance to do that and knowledge. And good brands like us to bring concepts to market that people can, translate to their pets' needs.
By the way, if your dogs didn't bark at least once during the episode, I would have been very concerned. So,
yeah, we do the best we can. There's really nowhere to put them. So there's, like I said, they're all over the place.
I love it. So I'm thinking about, so you've got a lot of product.
Yeah.
So in terms of because I'm looking at the variety of products, and we'll make sure if you're around at the end, we'll make sure you could see the website and go there and follow through. Tell me about innovation inside your company.
Sure. It typically starts here on my desk. I'll have a specific idea. I'll generally think about it for 3, 4, 5 months at a time. I'll do a lot of competitive analysis because there are a lot of comps in the industry where you can get a sense on how certain segments are doing. So nothing is done blindly, Mitchell. I mean, you have to understand, what your market opportunity is, what the economics are going to look like, because you quite frankly can't afford to make a mistake. Okay. So, I generally conceptualize for quite a while. And then I've got a gentleman named Dr. Mo. I've worked with Dr. Mo for years. He's PhD from Purdue, understands the consumer side of the business and the animal side. And between the two of us, we create guidelines that fall within the AAFCO parameters. And AAFCO is essentially the governing body for pets and the foods that they eat. Some of the AAFCO guidelines, are relatively old. Some are new, and they're always changing. So it's a pretty dynamic industry in that sense. And then once we run economics, look at supply chain, because there's nothing worse than coming to market with something you can't get regularly, which really was a common issue throughout most of 2020 and through the good half of 2022. I have never seen supply chain constraints like they have been. And it's really at every level, from corrugated to protein to vitamins and minerals to obscure ingredients. Everything is either hard to get. So it took what normally was, a 3 to 6 month cycle conceptualized to market. And now I would say it takes about a year just because of some of the supply channel challenges that we're seeing. But that's really the process. And obviously there's a lot that goes in between to making sure packaging, design, layout, all of it resonates.
That's interesting. So who on the team figured out, or when did they figure out, and when did they change the processes that if it normally took 3 to 4 months of go to market, it now takes a year? Like that changes everything in terms of how you plan, how you set up, how you structure, how you deliver it. How did that come about? I mean, is this sort of you and magically you figure it out, or did the team do this?
You have to have a sense for what the market will bear. And the easiest example as I can give you is, why would you spend $500,000 on a market segment launch with no national trade shows for 2 years? So this is a conversation that I've had with people that quite frankly don't understand how hard it is on a startup during a global pandemic. As a legacy brand, you probably saw some windfall, some benefit. Whether or not it's sustainable and you can lap it year over year remains to be seen. That really depends on how well you run your business. But as a startup, to try to build a brand curbside was darn near impossible. Okay, so I mean, it challenged us at every level. At one point during our conversation, you had mentioned you were going to ask me about COVID, and I can tell you, I've never pivoted so hard in my life. I had very specific channel strategy starting from 2019 till today, and I had to drastically change that because of there really being no listings, is what we referred to it as. You couldn't get a listing. So, it did change things in terms of the innovation timeline. You couldn't come to market because you didn't have an audience to showcase the product. And then when you did come to market, you didn't have a retail base that was, receiving of what you were bringing. So there was about 2 years there where we were truly just being very patient, innovating behind the scenes. And even though we're heading into our 5th year, I see this as year 1. I mean, truly.
That's just so you started. Did you start like a year before COVID, or when did you?
Exactly 1 year before COVID.
Mm-hmm. And so how far along in your go-to-market strategy were you before you got slapped in the face?
We had about 3 product segments, from dog complete meals, Greek frozen yogurt treats for pets, dogs and cats, and then our raw goat milk for dogs and cats, all within the first year. Everything obviously got put on hold. What was the question again? I'm sorry.
Oh, you actually answered it perfectly well.
Okay.
So when things got put on hold, where was the pressure? I mean, if I'm trying to think about it, as I'm sitting on your team, I'm in a team meeting. Where was the pressure? What was the pressure valve?
Well, we're not selling high value vehicles. If it was a different call, I'd probably call out a name brand, but I would say we're not selling cars. So we're in the business of high velocity. We sell multiple units, and over time you try to make a few pennies, right? Whenever you have the situation that occurred over the last 2 years, the consumer base drastically changes. You don't have as many customers walking through the stores. Buying patterns shifted online dramatically. And so for us, it was dealing with the lack of initial velocity, because there's a certain amount of front spend that has to come in there. For example, for us, there is a severe lack of freezers in the pet industry. For the reasons I gave you earlier, it's always been kibble and bits, and now you have this fast move to fresh and frozen. So if you want to play the game, you better go out and buy freezers. So I think we'd purchased, close to 1,000 freezer systems that were all strategically placed throughout North America that carry our brands and are logoed with our products. And there's a cost that comes with that. And if you don't have the revenue and the recycle to support that investment, it can make for a very long startup period. And so, I think I'm not ashamed to say that, it was very hard. We've gotten through what I believe to be the worst of it. And we're really poised now just for growth. We're truly being recognized as probably the fastest growing dual brand platform in America. We have over 240 SKUs today. I'm really proud of my team. Mitchell, you have to understand, we came from 7 product SKUs by the end of 2019 with virtually no listings. We continued the momentum, and we have over 13 segments and 240 SKUs today. So It's pretty phenomenal growth. And I've never been a part of this much growth this quickly, but you can't ignore the pet industry. I mean, look at how many pet households during COVID, What's unfortunate is how many of the pets are going back to rescue and adoption. And we're big on Boss Nation Cares to try to support that as best we can, because it's the worst thing for a pet to be brought home and then to be discarded.
Gives me a negative set of chills.
Absolutely.
I was curious about the freezers. It's interesting, since you bought 1,000 freezers. Does that now, when things are coming back, and congratulations on the 240 brands, that's crazy cool.
The SKUs.
Are the freezers playing a big part these days? I know you had to do it, but is that a good part of the business, or how does that?
Yeah, the business is about 50-50 dry concepts, either consumable or hard goods, versus the other half's frozen. And so I've got a pretty good business mix. So if one particular segment, takes longer to get entry, I've got other avenues. But, it's been one of the slower growth segments, and you'd probably find it little comical in terms of what's really holding back the growth. People don't have enough sub panels or power in their stores to support new freezer systems. So there's some infrastructural investment that has to happen at the store level. And in some cases, the stores are asking the brands to fit the bill. Okay, so how aggressively do you want to play and get your brand positioned? And then just the cost. You're dealing with anytime you're purchasing an asset and you're looking at recovery value, it takes time for both the retailer and the brand to recognize that. And every brand starts slowly. Very rarely in my life have I seen brands just come out the gate on fire. Every brand has an incubation period, a growth period, an awareness, and then an expansion phase. Mm-hmm. And, we're definitely in that awareness zone right now where people are understanding what the brand's message is. They want to understand the continuity and everything that we're doing. And now, truly, I believe next year you're going to see quite a bit in terms of brand acceptance as we really start to expand in the U.S.
I love that. Basel, is there a question based on this conversation, is there a question I should have asked you that I didn't yet?
I don't know. What gets you up in the morning?
That's a great question. Besides saying fit and healthy, what gets you up in the morning?
When I contemplate that question, I think of a very brief period of time in my life in 2006. When I got a phone call from a co-packer and they said to me, your concept is doing extremely well, so well that we can't make it for you anymore because we were cannibalizing some of their business. And it was a gut punch. You just hit me so hard. We literally went out of business overnight. And I had to fly to the Central Valley of California with the intention of staying 3 days. Ended up staying for 3 months, getting our yogurt facility back up and running. And I couldn't tell you, every single morning, the one thing that got me out of bed was the fear of failure, And I think that's doesn't resonate with me today like it used to. Now it's wanting to achieve things at levels consistent with what I've done in the past. But I think that's typically what drove me previously. You want to do well. You want your family to see you do well. And so that particular time of my life, that's what got me up and into the Starbucks every morning and got me into the plant by 4 a.m. to start trying to make yogurt again. And if you have to convince an entrepreneur to be an entrepreneur, then you probably shouldn't even start, right?
They fall into the category of entrepreneur, not entrepreneur.
There Agreed. You
go. This was amazing. I appreciate you spending time sharing your values. I could see if somebody was interested in working at your firm, that type of culture, what it would feel like to work with you, to be able to take what you're doing and bring it to the next level. How best should people reach out to you if they're super interested in learning more?
Well, I have a horrible digital footprint, but I'm doing a better job of it. But they can reach me on LinkedIn, at I think it's Boss Dog Dad, or at my name, Basel Nassar. Or you can always get a hold of me at my email at basel@bossdogbrand.com.
Yeah, and we're showing your website at the moment. It's pretty cool looking. I like it, and I like who you are and what you do.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. I'm a result of the team that I have around me, and together we achieve great things.
That's awesome. Well, hey, Basel, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate this. And what I want to say for those that are here, this is now your time to spread some cred dust. Click on the like button, share with your friends, create that aha moment that resonated in you, and share that on social. And what I want to say is we actually do something called the Ultimate Credibility Bootcamp. It's just the way this name sounds, ultimatecredibilitybootcamp.com. And we work with very cool people just like Basel in terms of who are they and what do they do and how do you actually show up in a credible way, both synchronously and asynchronously. And please feel free to do that. We've got another one coming up. We do this once a quarter. and would love to be able to talk to you and see if you're a good fit for the boot camp. As you can tell, thank you, Garen, so much for putting the screen up there. And I want to say to you is the most important thing you could do in anything you do in life. This is for your family. This is for your friends. This is for yourself. This is for your entrepreneurship. This is for your company. Is show up in the world as yourself. Show up in the world as a credible human who's doing the right thing, and good things will come your way. Thanks so much for spending time with us. You guys have a great rest of day. Take care, everyone. Bye now.